Don't drink this. Annie's shout burst into the room like a slammed door. She ran forward without thinking, her small body moving on pure instinct. Her hand struck the glass just as it touched the man's lips. Water splashed across the sheets and the bedside table, the glass tumbling from the woman's fingers and shattering on the floor. Daniel Wright flinched hard, his heart jolting as if someone had pulled him back from a ledge. The room froze. Annie stood there, breathing fast, her chest rising and falling, eyes locked on Daniel. For a second, she looked ready to bolt. Then she didn't. She stayed. Daniel stared at her, stunned. He had been many things in his life, celebrated, criticized, admired, betrayed, but never interrupted like this by a child he had never seen before. "What?" he began, then stopped. The woman beside the bed stepped forward sharply. "What is this?" she said, her voice tight with outrage. "Who let a child in here?" A man standing slightly behind her, a well-dressed visitor with an easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, shook his head. "Daniel, you're not feeling well," he said calmly. "She's probably confused. Kids misunderstand things all the time." Annie's fingers curled into fists. "She's just a child," the woman added quickly, placing a hand on Daniel's arm as if to steady him. "You shouldn't listen to this. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Have a Zenri." Daniel looked from the spilled water to Annie's face. She wasn't crying. She wasn't apologizing. She looked scared, but there was something else there too. Determination. "Why did you do that?" Daniel asked quietly. Annie swallowed. "Because that water isn't right." The man gave a soft chuckle. "See? That's exactly what I mean. Not right isn't very specific." "Sweetheart." Annie's jaw tightened. She took a step forward, her voice shaking but clear. "You switched it." The woman stiffened. "Excuse me? Last night," Annie said, the words coming faster now. "When it was dark, you and the nurse were whispering. You had 2 bottles." Daniel felt a slow, cold pressure build in his chest. The man raised his hand slightly, as if calming a nervous animal. "This is nonsense. She's mixing things up. Hospitals are busy places." Annie shook her head hard. "I'm not." She looked directly at the woman now, no longer at Daniel. "One bottle had a blue label," she said. "The other one was white. You told the nurse the blue one couldn't be used yet." The woman's mouth opened, then closed again. Daniel leaned forward slightly, ignoring the weakness in his arms. "Annie," he said. "How do you know that?" "Because I was waiting in the hallway," Annie replied. "I wait there every night. My uncle cleans the floors." The man scoffed. "You expect us to believe a child overheard some private medical discussion and understood it?" Annie's hands trembled, but she didn't back away. "You said the white one would make him forget things," she said, her eyes never leaving the woman's face. "You said he wouldn't be able to walk right for a while." The room went very quiet. Daniel's wife laughed, but it sounded thin. "This is absurd," she said. "Daniel, please." She's repeating words she doesn't understand. "I was it." Annie stepped closer, close enough that Daniel could see the faint dirt under her fingernails, the tear-mended seam in her jacket. She pointed at the woman, her fingers shaking. "You changed the label," Annie said. "I saw you peel it off. You put the old one on the wrong bottle." Daniel felt his breath hitch. "That's enough," the man said sharply. "This is inappropriate." "Is it?" Daniel asked. Everyone turned to him. He looked at the woman he had trusted, then at the man beside her. Then he looked back at Annie. She met his gaze without blinking. "You're saying," Daniel said slowly, "that the water I was about to drink was meant to be taken with the wrong medication." Annie nodded. "Yes, Daniel," his wife said, her voice low now. "Urgent. You're sick. You're exhausted. You can't let a frightened child put ideas in your head." Daniel glanced at the glass shards on the floor, the water soaking into the white sheets. If Annie hadn't acted, he would have swallowed it without question. He turned back to her. "What made you come in here?" he asked. Annie hesitated. "I was scared," she admitted. "I didn't know if I should say anything." The man snorted. "So you guessed?" "No," Annie said, suddenly fierce. I listened. Something in Daniel broke then, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough that his eyes burned. He thought of all the meetings where he had ignored quiet warnings because they came from the wrong person, the wrong place. Enough, he said. The word carried weight. He looked at his wife. I want the water tested. Her eyes widened. Daniel, and the medication, he continued. All of it. I want a full review. Right now. The man opened his mouth to argue, then stopped when Daniel's gaze settled on him. There was no anger in it, just resolve. Annie stood very still, as if bracing for punishment that didn't come. Daniel looked at her again, and his voice softened. You did the right thing, he said. Annie's shoulders sagged, relief washing over her so suddenly her knees nearly buckled. As staff hurried in and the room filled with quiet urgency, Daniel kept his eyes on the small girl who had dared to speak. He knew, with a clarity sharper than any diagnosis, that whatever illness had brought him here was not the greatest danger he faced. The real danger had been trusting the wrong silence. The hospital room never quite returned to normal after Annie spoke. Even after the broken glass was swept away and the wet sheets replaced, something invisible lingered in the air. A tension that refused to be dismissed as a misunderstanding. Daniel Wright lay back against the pillows, watching the careful choreography of nurses and staff as they moved with polite efficiency, their voices low, their eyes avoiding one another. The water had been taken away in a sealed container. The medication tray followed shortly after. No one said the word investigation, but everyone felt it. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment and listened to the machines beside him. The steady beeping should have been comforting. Instead, it reminded him how dependent he was on strangers, on systems, on trust. He had built an empire by questioning everything. Yet here, in a hospital bed, he had accepted whatever was placed in his hand until a child knocked it away. When he opened his eyes again, Annie was still there, standing near the door with her uncle. The man kept one hand resting lightly on her shoulder, as if afraid she might vanish if he let go. Annie's gaze drifted around the room, cautious now, like a small animal that had made noise and was waiting for consequences. Daniel's wife sat rigidly in the chair beside the bed, her posture immaculate, her expression fixed somewhere between disbelief and restrained fury. The man who had accompanied her stood a few steps back, arms crossed, his jaw tight. Daniel broke the silence. "What's your name?" he asked the man by the door. "Marcus." The man replied quickly.
Hey there.
"Marcus Johnson, sir.
We're gonna take care of you.
I'm part of the night cleaning crew." Daniel nodded. "And she's your niece?" "Yes. Annie stays with me. I don't like leaving her alone." Daniel looked at Annie again. Up close, she looked exhausted. Not sleepy, worn. The kind of tired that came from too many hours waiting quietly in places not meant for children. "How long have you been coming here, Annie?" he asked. She hesitated, then answered softly.
She's all right, just tired.
"Every day." "Why?" She shrugged. "Because he works." The simplicity of the answer struck him harder than any accusation. He thought of his own childhood, of nannies and drivers, of never once having to wonder where he would sit while an adult finished a shift. "Did you tell anyone what you saw last night?" he asked. She shook her head. "No." "Why not?" Annie glanced at the floor. Grown-ups don't like it when kids say things. Daniel felt something twist inside his chest. His wife leaned forward sharply. "Daniel, this is enough," she said. "You're interrogating a child. She's been frightened. She needs to be taken home." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "We can go," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Grafted. Daniel raised his hand slightly. "No one's in trouble." The man beside his wife scoffed. "With all due respect, Daniel, this is unnecessary. You're not thinking clearly." Daniel turned his head and looked at him fully for the first time. "You are?" The man stiffened. "I'm just saying, you said she was confused," Daniel interrupted. "You said children misunderstand things." "Yes. Then explain something to me," Daniel said calmly. "Why did she describe the labels correctly?" No one answered. Daniel continued, his voice steady but firm. "Blue and white, not red, not green." She didn't guess. She remembered. His wife's fingers tightened around the armrest of the chair. "Coincidence?" she said. Children repeat things they hear. She could have picked it up anywhere. Could she? Daniel asked. He turned back to Annie. Did you hear anyone talk about those bottles before last night? No, Annie said. Just them. I will. Silence again. Daniel became aware of his heart rate climbing. Not from illness, but from something colder and sharper. Betrayal did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived dressed as care. He inhaled slowly, then spoke with the authority that had silenced boardrooms and bent negotiations. I want the nurse who was on duty last night. One of the staff members near the door nodded and stepped out immediately. His wife stood. Daniel, you're making this into something it's not. Have present. Sit down, he said. The words were quiet, but they landed with finality. She froze, then slowly returned to her chair. Daniel looked at Annie again. You were scared, he said. But you still came in here. She nodded. Her lips pressed together. What made you decide to act? He asked. Annie's voice was barely above a whisper. Because if you drank it, you might not remember. The room felt smaller. If this moment moved you even a little, please take a second to like this video. Share your thoughts in the comments right where you are watching. And subscribe to the channel for more stories that speak truth quietly, but powerfully. Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes for just a second. He imagined waking up not knowing his own name, not knowing the people around him, signing papers he could not read, agreeing to decisions he would never remember making. He imagined losing himself piece by piece while everyone called it recovery. When he opened his eyes, they were wet. His wife noticed. Daniel, he held up his hand again. Not now. A nurse entered the room. Her expression professional but tense. Daniel studied her face, searching for cracks, for guilt, for anything that might confirm or deny the story that had already rooted itself in his mind. We're reviewing the medication records, she said carefully. There was a discrepancy. His wife's head snapped up. What discrepancy? The nurse hesitated. One of the bottles was logged incorrectly. Annie stiffened. Daniel felt his breath catch. Incorrectly? How? The label matched the chart, the nurse said, but the contents didn't. No one spoke. Daniel looked at Annie then, really looked at her. At the small girl who had waited quietly in a hallway night after night, who had listened when adults whispered, who had risked being dismissed, punished, ignored. You saved me, he said, softly. Annie shook her head. I just told. Daniel felt a tear escape despite himself. He didn't wipe it away. In that moment, he understood something with painful clarity. Truth did not always come from authority. Sometimes it came from the margins. Sometimes it wore worn shoes and waited patiently on hard benches. He turned to Marcus. You did a good job, he said, looking out for her. Marcus swallowed, nodding. Daniel looked back at Annie. You're safe, he said. I promise. Whether the promise was something he could fully keep yet, he didn't know. But he meant it, because the more he thought about it, the more he realized the danger had never been the fever. It had been trust. And trust, once broken, demanded answers. By late afternoon, the hospital had slipped into a quieter rhythm. The kind that came after visiting hours thinned and the hallways belonged mostly to staff and the occasional family member who refused to leave. The sunlight faded from the narrow window in Daniel Wright's room, replaced by the soft glow of overhead lights that made everything look flatter, more clinical. Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The fever had not returned, but sleep refused to come. His body was tired. His mind was not. It moved in slow, deliberate circles around the same truth, again and again, like a tongue testing a cracked tooth. Someone had tried to alter his mind, not through force, not through violence, through something far more insidious: routine, care. A glass of water handed over with a calm smile. He turned his head slightly and looked toward the chair by the wall. Annie sat there now, her feet not quite touching the floor, swinging gently back and forth. Marcus stood nearby, leaning against the wall with his arms folded, exhaustion written plainly across his face. He had been offered a break, even a ride home. He had declined both. I'll stay, he'd said. She's already scared enough. Daniel respected that. The nurse had returned once, then twice, each time with clipped explanations and careful phrasing. There had been a discrepancy, a procedural issue. Nothing to worry about yet. The kind of language designed to soothe patients while buying time. Daniel had heard it before in financial scandals, in corporate apologies, in press conferences, where the truth waited patiently behind the curtain. He had also noticed something else. No one had asked Annie to leave. That was not an accident. Mr. Wright? Annie's voice was small, hesitant. Yes, Daniel said, turning toward her. Are you mad? The question caught him off guard. Mad at who? He asked gently. Annie shrugged. At me, for making a mess. Daniel glanced at the faint water stain still visible on the edge of the mattress. No, he said. I'm not mad. She studied his face carefully, as if testing the answer for cracks. Grown-ups get mad when things don't go the way they want. Daniel gave a short, humorless breath. That's true, she frowned. But you didn't yell. No, he said. I didn't. Annie looked down at her hands. The lady did. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He chose his words carefully, the way he did before speaking to investors or employees when the truth was complicated. Sometimes, he said, people get angry when they're afraid. Annie considered this. Was she afraid? Daniel didn't answer right away. He thought of his wife's face when the nurse mentioned the discrepancy, the tightness around her eyes, the way she had avoided his gaze afterward. Yes, he said quietly. I think she was. Was damn. Annie nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something she already suspected. A soft knock came at the door before it opened. A hospital administrator stepped inside, followed by a man in a dark suit who did not belong to the medical staff. He carried himself differently, straight-backed, measured, his eyes alert without being aggressive. Daniel recognized the type instantly. This man did not react to emergencies. He anticipated them. Mr. Wright, the administrator said. This is Thomas Reed, hospital compliance. Daniel gestured weakly toward the chair across from his bed. Please. Reed sat, placing a slim folder on his lap. His gaze flicked briefly to Annie, then back to Daniel. We're reviewing last night's medication logs, Reed said. There are inconsistencies we can't ignore. Daniel nodded. I assumed as much. There was a manual override on one of the entries, Reed continued. That shouldn't have happened without physician approval. And did it? Daniel asked. Reed paused. We're still confirming. Daniel shifted slightly, feeling a dull ache ripple through his muscles. I want everything documented, he said. Every name. Every signature. Reed inclined his head. Of course. Daniel glanced toward Annie. She overheard the exchange. Reed followed his gaze. So I've been told. Annie straightened a little, suddenly aware of the attention. Her instinct was to shrink back, but she forced herself to stay still. Reed looked at her, not unkindly. You were very brave, he said. Annie didn't smile. I just listened. Reed nodded once, as if that answer mattered. When they left, the room felt heavier, not lighter. The machinery hummed. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled softly over tile. Marcus exhaled slowly. This is getting serious, he said under his breath. Daniel met his eyes. It already was. Marcus hesitated. Sir, I don't mean to overstep, but if someone really did what she said they did, they won't get away with it, Daniel said. The certainty in his own voice surprised him. It wasn't bravado. It was resolve. Annie swung her feet again. What happens now? Daniel watched her for a moment before answering. He thought about contracts and courts, about investigations that took months and truths that took years. None of that belonged in a 6-year-old's world. Now, he said, we make sure no one can pretend this didn't happen. Annie frowned. Will they say I was lying? Daniel's throat tightened. Some might try. She looked at him, eyes searching. Will you believe me? The question landed harder than any accusation. Daniel didn't answer right away. He thought of how easily he could have dismissed her, how close he had come to drinking the water, how thin the line was between safety and ruin. Yes, he said, I will. Oh, Annie let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Outside the window, the sky had darkened to deep blue. Lights flickered on in distant buildings, Offices and apartments filled with people who had no idea how close Daniel Wright had come to losing himself that morning. He turned his head slightly, careful not to disturb the IV line, and stared at the ceiling again. For the first time since falling ill, he felt truly awake. And he knew this was only the beginning, because someone had underestimated a child, and he had underestimated how much that mattered. Night settled fully over the hospital, the kind of quiet that carried weight rather than peace. The overhead lights dimmed automatically, leaving pools of soft illumination along the corridor outside Daniel Wright's room. From his bed, he could hear the distant rhythm of the building, the low murmur of voices at the nurse's station, the occasional squeak of a cart, the steady breath of machines keeping watch. Annie sat on the chair again, curled inward now, her knees pulled up, her chin resting lightly against them. Marcus had stepped out briefly to finish his shift, promising he would be close. Annie nodded when he left, but the moment the door closed, the room felt larger, emptier. Daniel noticed. "You don't have to stay if you're tired," he said gently. Annie shook her head. "I'm okay." It was the same answer she gave adults when the truth felt too complicated to explain. Daniel studied her from the bed. She reminded him of children he had seen at charity events, except those children were always clean, smiling, coached. Annie wasn't performing anything. She was simply enduring. "Do you like school?" he asked, the question slipping out before he could reconsider. Annie blinked, surprised. "I did." "Did?" She shrugged. "We move." Daniel nodded. He understood more than she knew. Stability was something people assumed came naturally. It didn't. "I didn't like school much either," he said. Annie looked at him, doubtful. "You're on TV." He almost smiled. "That doesn't mean I liked it." For a moment, the room softened. Annie's shoulders eased just a little. A nurse appeared quietly at the door, checking vitals, adjusting lines. She smiled politely at Annie, then at Daniel, but there was something cautious in her movements, as if the room itself demanded care. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Yes," Daniel replied. "Thank you." "Wei." When she left, the silence returned. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. His thoughts had been drifting to places he didn't often visit. Boardrooms, courtrooms, private conversations held behind closed doors. He knew how investigations worked, not just in theory, but in practice. He also knew how often they were steered, softened, delayed, until the truth lost its urgency. Unless someone insisted. "Annie," he said. She looked up. "What you did today," he continued. "It wasn't small." She frowned. "It felt small." "That's because you're used to being ignored," he said, then immediately regretted the bluntness. But Annie didn't look offended. She looked thoughtful. "People don't see me," she said quietly. "They see past me." Daniel felt a slow ache settle behind his eyes. "I see you," he said. She searched his face, testing the words the way she tested everything adults said. "Even if they say I'm wrong?" "Yes," he said. "Especially then." The door opened again, this time with more intention. Two figures entered hospital security, calm but alert. One of them spoke softly to Daniel. "Sir, we're restricting access to this wing for the night. Just as a precaution." Daniel nodded. "I understand." Annie stiffened. The guard noticed and softened his tone. "You're not in trouble," he said to her. "We just want to make sure everyone's safe." The sedated 9 to 9. She nodded, but her fingers tightened around the fabric of her jacket. When they left, Annie whispered, "Is someone mad?" Daniel shook his head. "Someone is worried," he said. "And worried people make mistakes." Annie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "The lady didn't look worried." Daniel thought about that. "No," he admitted. She looked controlled. Annie's brow furrowed. "That's worse." He exhaled softly. "Yes, it is." Hours passed slowly. At some point, Marcus returned, his shoulders sagging with fatigue. He smiled at Annie, relieved. "Hey, Peanut," he said quietly. "You doing okay?" She nodded and slid off the chair to stand beside him. Marcus glanced at Daniel. "They told me I could stay nearby," he said. If that's all right, I'd prefer it, Daniel replied. Marcus hesitated. Sir, I don't want to cause problems. Daniel met his eyes. You didn't. That seemed to settle something in Marcus. He pulled a chair closer to Annie and sat. The clock crept past midnight. Daniel drifted in and out of light sleep, fragments of thought weaving through his dreams. He saw documents sliding across polished tables, faces smiling too smoothly, pens signing names that felt heavier than ink. When he woke again, his wife's chair was empty. The realization was immediate and sharp. He scanned the room, then pressed the call button. A nurse arrived quickly. Can I help you? My wife, Daniel said. The nurse hesitated. She stepped out earlier. How long ago? I'm not certain. About an hour. Daniel nodded slowly. Thank you. When the nurse left, Daniel stared at the ceiling again. Annie watched him. She left, she said. Yes, Daniel replied. She didn't say goodbye. No, he agreed. Annie hugged her jacket tighter around herself. That means something. Daniel closed his eyes. He didn't deny it. Annie, he said after a moment. If someone asks you questions about what you saw, it might feel uncomfortable. She nodded. People don't like answers they don't want. Daniel's lips curved slightly. You're wiser than most adults I know. She didn't smile at the compliment. Will they ask you? Too? Yes, he said, and I'll answer. She looked relieved by that. Outside, the hospital continued its quiet vigil, unaware that something fundamental had shifted inside one room on the VIP floor. A child had spoken, an adult had listened, and the balance of power, fragile as glass, had begun to crack. Morning came slowly, filtered through a thin strip of pale light at the edge of the window. The hospital woke the way it always did, not all at once, but in stages. Footsteps multiplied in the hallway. Voices sharpened. Carts rolled past with quiet urgency. Daniel Wright lay awake, listening, aware that whatever had begun the day before was no longer contained inside his room. Annie sat cross-legged on the chair, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. She had not slept. Daniel could tell by the way her eyes followed every movement, every sound, as if rest were a luxury she had learned not to trust. Marcus stood by the window, sipping coffee from a paper cup. He hadn't said much since returning from the night shift. The lines in his face seemed deeper this morning, etched by worry rather than fatigue. At 7:30 sharp, a knock came at the door. Daniel answered before anyone else could.
There is no mistake.
Come in. Two people entered. A woman in a navy blazer with a hospital badge clipped neatly to the lapel, and a man Daniel did not recognize, tall, silver-haired, carrying a leather portfolio. They introduced themselves with careful professionalism, risk management, legal counsel, words that belonged to daylight. Mr. Wright, the woman said, we'd like to ask you a few questions about yesterday's incident. Daniel nodded. So would I. The man smiled politely. Of course, we just want to understand what happened. I'm one of the tens of God. Daniel shifted slightly, sitting more upright. A child prevented me from ingesting medication that may not have been intended for me. The man's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. That's one interpretation. Annie stiffened at the word interpretation. The woman glanced toward her. Sweetheart, this conversation is for adults. Daniel's eyes sharpened. She stays. The woman hesitated, then inclined her head. As you wish. They's not about it great. Marcus took a half step closer to Annie, his presence quiet but firm. The man opened his portfolio. Mr. Wright, you were recovering from a fever. High temperatures can cause confusion. I wasn't confused, Daniel said. Memory gaps? The man pressed gently. No, the woman interjected. We've reviewed preliminary findings. There was a labeling error. It appears unintentional. Annie's hands clenched. Daniel noticed. Unintentional how? The woman glanced at the man. A nurse logged the wrong bottle. Which nurse? Daniel asked. We're still determining responsibility, the man replied. Daniel leaned forward. You're determining who to blame, not what happened. Silence settled, thick and uncomfortable. Annie spoke then, her voice small but steady. She peeled the label off. The woman turned, startled. What did you say? Annie stood up from the chair. Her knees trembled, but she didn't sit back down. The lady, she said. She peeled it off and put it on the other bottle. The man's expression tightened. That's a serious accusation. I know, Annie said. Daniel watched her closely. He could see the effort it took for her to stay where she was, to keep speaking when everything in her body told her to stop. Annie, the woman said carefully, are you sure you're remembering correctly? Yes. How can you be so sure? Annie looked at her. Because it took time. She was careful. The room felt suddenly very small. Daniel turned to the man. I want an independent review. External. No internal summaries. The man hesitated. Mr. Wright, I'll pay for it, Daniel said, but I won't control it. That stopped him. The woman cleared her throat. We'll make arrangements. When they left, the air seemed to move again. Marcus exhaled. They didn't like that. Daniel nodded. They weren't meant to. Annie sat back down, her legs folding under her. She looked exhausted now, the adrenaline finally ebbing. Did I do something wrong? She asked. Daniel answered without hesitation. No, Marcus added quietly. You told the truth. Annie absorbed that, nodding once. Later that morning, Daniel's wife returned. She entered with the same composed stride, the same careful expression, but something in her eyes had shifted. Calculation edged out concern. Daniel, she said, stopping short when she saw Annie still there. You're awake, Edund. I've been awake, he replied. She glanced at Marcus. I didn't expect company. They're staying, Daniel said. Her lips tightened. This is inappropriate. No, Daniel said. What's inappropriate is pretending yesterday didn't happen. She moved closer to the bed. You're overreacting. The hospital admitted there was an error someone tried very hard to hide. Daniel replied. Her voice softened. You're tired. You don't need this stress. Annie looked up at her. You left last night. The woman's head snapped toward her. Excuse me? You didn't say goodbye, Annie continued. People do that when they don't want to answer questions. The woman laughed, a brittle sound. Children shouldn't psychoanalyze adults. Daniel felt anger rise, slow and controlled. She's observing. That's not analysis. His wife turned back to him. You're letting her poison your thoughts. Daniel's gaze held steady. No, I'm letting her clarify them. Ever. The man from the day before appeared in the doorway then, the one who had stood beside his wife. He hesitated when he saw Annie, then recovered quickly. Daniel, he said lightly. I hear things got a little dramatic. Daniel did not smile. You're not welcome here. The man raised an eyebrow. That's unnecessary. Leave, Daniel said. For a moment, the man looked as though he might argue. Then he caught the look in Daniel's eyes and thought better of it. After they were gone, the room felt quieter than before. Annie hugged her jacket close. She's mad, she whispered. Yes, Daniel said. Because control is slipping. Annie looked at him. Will it be dangerous? Daniel considered the question carefully. It could be, he said honestly. But not if we're careful. She nodded. I'm good at being careful. He believed her. That afternoon, Daniel signed paperwork he had never imagined needing. Orders, authorizations, requests that could not be undone easily. With each signature, the shape of the problem became clearer. This wasn't about a mistake. It was about access and power and the belief that no one small enough to be ignored would ever speak loudly enough to matter. Daniel looked at Annie as she sat quietly by the window, watching the world move without her. They had miscalculated. By the third day, Daniel Wright understood something had changed not just around him, but because of him. The hospital room no longer felt like a place of rest. It had become a quiet command center. People came in pairs now. Questions were asked carefully, answers written down slowly. No one rushed, no one joked. The easy confidence of routine had been replaced by the caution of people who knew they were being watched. Daniel noticed everything. He noticed how nurses checked wristbands twice instead of once, how medication carts were never left unattended, how doors closed more softly, as if sound itself could become evidence. Annie noticed too. She sat on the floor that morning, legs crossed, coloring with a set of donated crayons a volunteer had brought by. She didn't hum. She didn't fidget. Her attention moved the way it always had, quietly, alert, absorbing details adults filtered out. Marcus stood near the door, arms folded, his posture protective without being obvious. He had taken the day off at Daniel's insistence, though he looked uncomfortable with the idea of being paid to sit. "I can clean," he had said. "You already are," Daniel replied. "Just not floors." The words lingered. A knock came at the door shortly before noon. Daniel answered it himself. This time, the man who entered introduced himself with a badge. Daniel recognized instantly, not from the hospital. "Mr. Wright," the man said, extending his hand. "My name is Alan Brewer, State Medical Oversight." Daniel shook his hand. "I was expecting you." Brewer glanced briefly at Annie, then at Marcus. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "No," Daniel said. "You're right on time." They sat. Brewer opened a slim folder, but did not immediately look at it. "I'll be direct," he said. "Someone filed a formal complaint last night." Daniel nodded. "I did." Brewer studied him carefully. "And the child?" Annie looked up from her drawing. "She's the reason," Daniel said. Brewer's gaze softened slightly. "I'd like to hear from her, if that's all right." Annie froze. Marcus shifted instinctively. "She doesn't have to. She can choose," Daniel said gently, looking at Annie. "No one will force you." Annie stared at the floor for a long moment. Then she stood. "I can talk," she said quietly. "But I don't like when people don't listen." Brewer nodded once. "Fair enough." "Oh," Annie didn't sit. She stood where she was, small and straight, hands clasped in front of her. "I was waiting in the hallway," she began. "Like always." Brewer glanced at Marcus. "You work nights?" "Yes," Marcus said. "Maintenance," Annie continued. "It was late. The lights were low. The lady came with the nurse. They thought no one was there." "What did you hear?" Brewer asked. Annie closed her eyes briefly. "They talked about making him calmer, easier. The nurse asked if it was safe. The lady said it didn't matter yet." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Brewer kept his voice even. "Did you see the bottles?" "Yes." "Tell me about them." "One had a blue label, one had a white one. The blue one stayed. The white one got switched." "How?" "Over. She peeled it off," Annie said. "Slow, so it wouldn't tear." Brewer exhaled slowly and finally looked down at his folder. "Thank you," he said. "That's very clear." Annie looked at him. "Are you going to forget it?" "No," Brewer replied. "I write things down so I don't." That seemed to satisfy her. When Brewer left, Daniel sat back against the pillows, suddenly drained. The truth, once spoken, took energy with it. Annie returned to her drawing, her hands slightly unsteady now that the moment had passed. "You did well," Marcus murmured. Annie didn't look up. "I just said what happened. Bye, guy." Daniel watched her, thinking how many times he had heard executives say the same thing while burying half the truth under careful language. In the afternoon, his wife returned again. She didn't raise her voice this time. She didn't accuse. She sat down slowly, hands folded in her lap, and sighed as if deeply tired. "Daniel," she said, "we're embarrassing ourselves." The word landed like a test. Daniel turned his head toward her. "We?" She gestured around the room. "Investigators, oversight," staff whispering. "This isn't how things are handled." "Then how are they handled?" he asked. "Privately," she said, discreetly, with respect. Annie looked up at that. "Respect," Daniel repeated. "For whom?" His wife hesitated. "For us." Daniel's voice was calm. "What about respect for the truth?" She looked at Annie then, really looked at her, and something like annoyance flashed across her face before it was masked again. "She's a child," she said softly. "She doesn't understand consequences." Annie stood. "I understand," she said. The woman blinked. "You do?" "Yes," Annie replied. "If I didn't say anything, something bad would happen. And if I did, people would be mad." Daniel felt a surge of pride so sudden it surprised him. "That's not understanding consequences," his wife said. "That's guessing." Annie shook her head. No. That's choosing. The room went very still. Daniel spoke before his wife could respond. This conversation is over. She stood, her chair scraping softly against the floor. You're making a mistake. Daniel met her gaze without flinching. No, I'm correcting one. After she left, Marcus let out a slow breath. She doesn't like losing control, he said quietly. No, Daniel replied. She doesn't. Annie sat back down, her legs tucked under her. Is she going to try again? The question was simple. The implication was not. Daniel looked at the ceiling, then back at her. I don't know, he said honestly. But I won't let anyone hurt you. Annie studied his face. You can't see everything. No, Daniel admitted. But together, we see more. She considered that, then nodded. Outside the window, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet battle unfolding on the upper floor of a private hospital. A battle not of force, but of attention, of who was believed, of who mattered. Daniel understood now that what had started with a spilled glass of water had become something else entirely. A line had been crossed, and once crossed, it could not be uncrossed. The first real fracture appeared that evening. Daniel felt it before he could name it, the way one senses a storm before the sky changes color. The hospital room was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Annie sat on the floor again, her back against the wall this time, tracing the edge of a paper cup with her finger. Marcus had stepped out to speak with a supervisor, leaving the two of them alone. Daniel watched the door. He had learned long ago that danger rarely announced itself. It waited for moments like this when vigilance softened, when exhaustion dulled the edges of instinct. Mr. Wright, a nurse he hadn't seen before, stood in the doorway. She was young, polite, her badge turned slightly away from the light. Yes? Daniel replied. I'm here to check your vitals, she said, and to bring your evening medication. Daniel's eyes moved to the tray in her hands. Annie noticed too. She didn't move, she didn't speak, but her posture changed, her shoulders tightening, her breathing slowing, her attention sharpening like a blade being drawn. Daniel caught it. What's your name? He asked the nurse. She hesitated, then smiled. Emily, and you were on duty last night? He asked. No, she said quickly. I'm covering a shift. Daniel nodded once. Before you come in, I'd like someone else present. The nurse's smile flickered. Sir, it's routine. We have the dations. So is caution. Daniel replied calmly. Annie stood. I've seen her before, Annie said quietly. The nurse's head snapped toward her. I don't think so. Annie shook her head. Not you. The other one. Daniel felt the tension spike. Which other one? He asked. The nurse who talked to the lady, Annie said. She stood where you're standing now. The nurse's lips pressed together. You're confusing me with someone else. I'm not, Annie replied. Daniel raised his hand. That's enough. He pressed the call button. The nurse shifted her weight, irritation creeping into her voice. Mr. Wright, I'm just trying to do my job. I'm trying to stay alive, Daniel said. We all have priorities. A second nurse appeared moments later, older, composed, her presence changing the room immediately. Is there a problem? She asked. Yes, Daniel said. I want a different nurse assigned to my care tonight. The younger nurse's eyes flashed. That's unnecessary. I have her. Please step out, the older nurse said, her tone leaving no room for argument. The door closed behind them. Annie let out a slow breath. You saw something, Daniel said quietly. Annie nodded. She looked at the tray first. Not you. Daniel absorbed that. Thank you. Marcus returned a few minutes later, sensing the shift in the air. Everything okay? For now, Daniel replied. That night, Daniel barely slept. His mind replayed small details he had once ignored: his wife's sudden interest in his medical updates, the way she asked about timelines, about recovery projections, about capacity. He had dismissed it as concern. He saw now how convenient that assumption had been. Sometime after midnight, Daniel woke to the sound of voices in the hallway. Low, urgent. He turned his head toward the door, straining to listen. Annie was already awake, sitting upright, her eyes fixed on the narrow gap beneath the door where light flickered. They're arguing, she whispered. Daniel listened harder. He caught fragments. Too risky. He's not as weak as you said. Footsteps moved away. Daniel's heart pounded. Annie looked at him. They didn't plan for me. No, Daniel said softly. They didn't. Morning brought confirmation of his unease. A man in an expensive suit arrived early, introducing himself as a legal representative, concerned about Daniel's well-being. He spoke smoothly, carefully, offering reassurances while subtly suggesting solutions. Perhaps a temporary conservatorship, the man said lightly. Just until you're fully recovered. Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. A conservatorship? He repeated. Purely precautionary, the man replied. Your wife would oversee things. Minimal disruption. This CDI've. Ever. Annie stood abruptly. That means he doesn't get to decide anymore. The man glanced at her with mild annoyance. That's an oversimplification. It means you take his voice, Annie said. Daniel looked at her, stunned by the clarity of her words. The man smiled thinly. Children shouldn't involve themselves in adult matters. Daniel's voice was calm but final. Get out, the man blinked. Mr. Wright, now, Daniel said. After he left, the room felt heavy with the weight of what had almost happened. Annie sat back down slowly. They're trying to lock you. Yes, Daniel said. They are. Because you listened, she added. Daniel nodded. Because I listened. He reached for the phone on his bedside table and made a call he had avoided for years. A name from his past. Someone he trusted because they had nothing to gain from him anymore. I need help, Daniel said simply. When he hung up, he felt steadier. Annie watched him. Are we in trouble? Daniel looked at her, the child who had seen what others refused to see, who had disrupted a plan built on silence and obedience. Yes, he said, but we're not alone. She nodded, accepting that as fact rather than comfort. Outside, the hospital moved through another ordinary day. Inside one room, lines were being drawn between control and conscience, between power and truth. Daniel Wright understood now that this was no longer about medication. It was about ownership, of money, of memory, of voice. And Annie, small and unyielding, had placed herself squarely in the middle of it. The call Daniel made that morning changed the temperature of the room. He didn't explain much to Annie or Marcus, only that help was coming, and that it was the kind of help that didn't announce itself with badges or smiles. After he hung up, he rested the phone back on the table and stared at it for a long moment, as if weighing the cost of what he had just done. Annie watched him closely. Was that a friend? Daniel nodded. An old one. Marcus raised an eyebrow. The kind you can trust? Daniel met his gaze. The kind who tells you when you're wrong. Marcus exhaled. Those are rare. Yes, Daniel said. That's why I kept his number. Late morning brought a new rhythm. Two unfamiliar security officers took positions outside the room. Their presence subtle, but unmistakable. Hospital staff moved with even more care now, their professionalism sharpened by awareness. Daniel noticed how conversations stopped when he looked up, how eyes tracked Annie in ways that were no longer dismissive, but cautious. Power had shifted. Annie felt it too. She stayed closer to Marcus, her hand occasionally brushing his sleeve as if to reassure herself he was still there. Yet her eyes remained alert, following movements, noting patterns. They're watching us, she whispered. Yes, Daniel replied. But we're watching back. Around noon, the door opened again. This time, the man who entered did not hesitate or ask permission. He was in his late 50s, tall, spare, with graying hair and a posture that suggested he had once worn a uniform and never fully taken it off. His eyes scanned the room in a single sweep, taking in Daniel, Annie, Marcus, the equipment, the door, the window. Then he smiled faintly. Daniel Wright, he said. You look like hell. Daniel let out a short laugh. Good to see you too, Sam. Reported 9. Annie stared at the man, unsure whether to stand or sit. Marcus straightened instinctively. Sam closed the door behind him and set a folder on the chair. I came as soon as I could, Daniel nodded. I didn't want to involve you. You never do, Sam replied. That's usually when you should. Sam's gaze shifted to Annie. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to her level without crowding her space.
They said you were looking rough.
You must be Annie. She stiffened. How do you know my name? Because I listen, Sam said simply. Annie studied him, then nodded once. Sam stood and turned back to Daniel. I spoke to a few people on my way in. Quietly, Daniel didn't ask who. He already knew. There's pressure, Sam continued. Legal, administrative. Someone's trying to move fast. They tried a conservatorship, Daniel said. Sam's jaw tightened. Then we're already late, Annie spoke up. They want to take his voice. Who is present? Sam looked at her. Something like respect flickering in his eyes. That's one way to put it. Daniel leaned back slightly. What do we do? Sam opened the folder. Inside were documents, notes, names highlighted in careful ink. We slow them down. We make everything visible. How? Marcus asked. By bringing in people who don't answer to the hospital or your wife. Sam replied. And by protecting the witness. Annie's fingers curled into her jacket. That's me. Yes, Sam said gently. It is. Annie swallowed. Am I in trouble? Sam shook his head. You're in danger. There's a difference. Daniel felt a surge of anger. She's a child, and that's exactly why they didn't think she mattered, Sam said. People like that always make the same mistake. The words settled heavily in the room. Sam straightened. I've arranged for an independent patient advocate and a private physician. They'll be here today. Daniel nodded. Good. There's something else, Sam added. Your wife left the hospital an hour ago. Annie looked up sharply. Left? Yes, Sam said. Didn't say where she was going. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. He had hoped she would stay close, would reveal more by trying to control the situation. Distance meant planning. She's not running, Sam continued. She's coordinating, Marcus muttered under his breath. Annie spoke quietly. When people leave like that, they're not done. Daniel opened his eyes. No, they're not. The afternoon dragged. Questions came in waves. A social worker arrived, kind but thorough, asking Annie about her home, her school, her routine. Annie answered honestly, without embellishment. Marcus sat close, his presence grounding her. When the social worker left, Annie looked drained. I don't like being looked at like that, she said. Daniel nodded. Like you're a problem to be solved. Yes, Annie replied. Not a person. Sam folded his arms. You handled it well. Oh, Annie shrugged. I just told the truth. Truth takes energy, Sam said. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. As evening approached, Daniel's private physician arrived, a man older than Daniel, with calm eyes and a voice that carried authority without arrogance. He reviewed charts, asked precise questions, ordered new tests. I want complete control over medication administration, the doctor said. No exceptions. The order was logged immediately. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest. For the first time since this had begun, he sensed real traction. That night, as the room dimmed again, Annie sat by the window, watching the city lights blink on one by one. Mr. Wright? She said. Yes? If this gets worse, will you still believe me? The question cut through him. Daniel shifted, then spoke slowly, deliberately. Annie, even if everyone else stops believing you, I won't. She nodded, satisfied with the answer. Outside the room, footsteps passed. Voices murmured. Somewhere in the building, plans were being made by people who believed power could still be negotiated, still be hidden. They were wrong, because inside one hospital room, a child had become impossible to ignore. And Daniel Wright had decided that silence was no longer an option. The first test results came back just after midnight. Daniel was awake when Sam returned to the room, his face unreadable, the folder tucked under his arm thicker than before. The city outside the window was quiet now, reduced to scattered lights and distant movement, as if the world had pulled back to watch. Sam closed the door carefully behind him. They confirmed it, he said. Daniel didn't speak. He waited. The water you were about to drink would have been harmless on its own, Sam continued, but combined with the substituted medication, it would have caused acute confusion within hours. Memory gaps, disorientation, loss of motor coordination. Annie's fingers tightened in the fabric of her jacket. Daniel felt a cold calm settle over him. So she was right. Yes, Sam said. Exactly right. Marcus let out a slow breath, the sound somewhere between relief and anger. What about the nurse? She denies everything, Sam replied. Says she followed instructions she assumed were legitimate. Daniel closed his eyes. Instructions. Always instructions. That was how people excused themselves while doing unforgivable things. Annie spoke softly. She was scared. Sam looked at her. Why do you think that? She kept asking if it was safe, Annie said. The lady told her it didn't matter yet. The word yet hung in the air. Daniel opened his eyes. Yet implies a plan. Sam nodded. That's how I read it. He set the folder down and opened it, spreading out documents across the table. Daniel recognized the patterns immediately. Timelines, signatures, overlapping authorities. Someone had been preparing for a scenario in which he could no longer advocate for himself. A scenario in which others would decide for him. They moved fast, Sam said. Too fast for this to be improvised. Daniel swallowed. Then it didn't start with my illness. I can't do. No, Sam replied. It started when you got sick. Annie shifted closer to Marcus. That means they were waiting. Yes, Daniel said quietly. It does. The door opened again, this time without knocking. A security officer stepped inside, his expression tense. Mr. Wright, he said, your wife is back. Daniel felt a flicker of something old and sharp recognition, not surprise. Let her in, he said. Annie looked up at him. Are you sure? Yes, Daniel replied. It's time. Well then, the door opened wider. She entered slowly, carefully composed, as if stepping onto a stage she had rehearsed for but never expected to perform on quite this way. Her eyes went first to Daniel, then briefly to Annie, then to Sam. She smiled faintly. I see you've assembled quite a group. Daniel didn't return the smile. We're past pleasantries. She sighed and took a seat, crossing her legs with practiced ease. I'm trying to protect you. From what? Daniel asked. From yourself, she replied smoothly. You're compromised, emotional, influenced. Annie's jaw tightened. You mean because I listened to a child, Daniel said. She tilted her head. Because you listened to the wrong one. The words landed hard. Annie stood before Daniel could stop her. You didn't think I'd say anything, she said. That's why you did it. The woman's eyes narrowed. I don't know what you think you saw. I saw you peel the label, Annie replied. I saw you look around first. Daniel watched his wife closely now. Not as a husband, but as a man finally willing to see what was in front of him. Why? He asked. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice was calm. You were becoming unpredictable. Daniel felt a slow burn spread through his chest. Unpredictable how? You were changing, she said. Your priorities, your will. You were talking about restructuring, about oversight, about things that would have cost us everything. Us. Sam shifted slightly but said nothing. You mean it would have cost you control? Daniel said. She met his gaze evenly. I mean it would have endangered what we built. Daniel let out a breath that trembled despite his effort to control it. You tried to take my mind. I tried to buy time, she corrected. Time to stabilize things, Annie whispered. By hurting him, the woman glanced at her with irritation. You don't understand adult decisions. Annie didn't back down. You didn't ask him. Silence filled the room, thick and unmistakable. Daniel spoke quietly. That's the difference between us. You made decisions for me. She warned me. His wife stood. This is going to get ugly. Daniel nodded. It already has. She looked at Sam. You think you can stop this? Sam replied evenly. I think sunlight helps. She laughed once, sharp and humorless. You think people like us burn that easily? Daniel surprised himself by smiling not warmly, but clearly. Yes, he said. Eventually, she turned toward the door. You're making a mistake. Daniel didn't stop her. When the door closed behind her, the room felt strangely lighter, as if something toxic had finally been vented. Annie's legs gave out then. She sat down hard on the chair, suddenly small again. Marcus crouched beside her. "You okay?" She nodded, but her eyes were glassy. "I was scared." Daniel reached out slowly, resting his hand on the edge of the bed nearest her. "So was I." She looked up at him. "But you stayed." "Yes," he said. "Because of you." Sam gathered the papers. "This just escalated," he said. Daniel nodded. "Good." Annie blinked. "Good?" "Yes," Daniel replied. "Because now there's no pretending this was a misunderstanding." He looked at the dark window, at the reflection of the room layered over the city beyond. "They thought they could move quietly," he said. "They thought no one would notice." Annie hugged her jacket tighter around herself. "They forgot about me." Daniel met her eyes. They forgot about truth. And that, he knew, was a mistake no amount of planning could undo. The fallout began the next morning. Daniel woke to the muted sound of voices outside his door, measured, professional, unmistakably cautious. He didn't need to see their faces to know what had changed. Power had a way of announcing itself not with noise, but with restraint. Annie was already awake, sitting on the chair with her feet tucked beneath her. She watched the door the way a sailor watched the horizon, alert to shifts others ignored. "They're being careful," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "That's how you know they're afraid." Sam arrived just after 8, carrying 2 phones and a look that suggested he hadn't slept. He closed the door behind him and spoke without preamble. "Your wife hired a firm overnight," he said. "Top tier. Aggressive. They're pushing a narrative." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Which one?" "That you're medically compromised," Sam replied. "That you're being manipulated. That a frightened child misunderstood a routine procedure, and everyone panicked." Annie's fingers curled into her jacket. "They're saying I'm wrong. They're saying you're unreliable," Sam corrected. "There's a difference." Daniel felt a familiar anger rise, tempered by something steadier. "And the hospital? They're hedging," Sam said. "Issuing internal memos, tightening access, protecting themselves." "Of course they are," Daniel said. Sam leaned against the table. "Here's the problem. This can turn into a long game. Depositions, experts, conflicting testimonies. People get tired. Stories blur." Annie looked up. "That's how they win." Daniel met her eyes. "Sometimes." She frowned. "That's not fair." "No," Daniel agreed. "It isn't." There was a knock at the door. A woman entered, older than most of the staff Daniel had seen, her posture confident without being rigid. She introduced herself as a patient advocate, independent, contracted directly by Daniel's office. "I'm here to ensure your rights are protected," she said, "and that no medical decisions are made without your informed consent." Daniel nodded. "Thank you." Her gaze shifted to Annie. "And this young lady?" "She stays," Daniel said. The advocate smiled slightly. "Good." As the morning unfolded, Daniel was asked to recount the events again carefully, precisely. He did so without embellishment, anchoring every detail to what he knew rather than what he felt. When Annie was invited to speak, Daniel watched the room closely. She didn't rush. She didn't dramatize. She spoke the way she always did, plain, direct, unafraid of silence. When she finished, the advocate closed her notebook and looked up. "Children don't fabricate timelines like that," she said. "They either guess or they remember." Annie looked down, embarrassed by the attention. By noon, the story had begun to leak, not to the press, not yet, but to the places that mattered. Daniel's phone buzzed with messages known for their timing rather than their loyalty. Board members, advisors, people who asked how he was feeling without asking what he knew. He ignored most of them. Instead, he asked Sam to call his CFO. "I want to freeze discretionary transfers," Daniel said. "Effective immediately." Sam raised an eyebrow. "That'll raise alarms." "Yes," Daniel said. "That's the point." Annie listened quietly. "They don't like losing money." "No," Daniel said. "They like losing control even less." The afternoon brought another visitor, this one expected. The lawyer from earlier returned, flanked now by a woman Daniel didn't recognize. They carried themselves with confidence that bordered on entitlement. "Mr. Wright?" the woman said. "We're here to discuss options." Daniel gestured weakly to the chair. "You can stand." Her smile faltered. "As you wish. Thanks for watching. We believe a mediated solution would be best." The lawyer began. "For your health. For privacy." "Privacy for whom?" Daniel asked. "For everyone involved," the woman replied smoothly. Daniel glanced at Annie. "Including her?" The woman's gaze flicked toward Annie, then away. "She's not the issue." Daniel's voice hardened. "She's the reason we're here." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Daniel, these situations can spiral. Public perception, regulatory interest. You don't want to be seen as unstable." Annie stood abruptly. "He's not unstable," she said. "You're just mad," he noticed. The woman sighed. "This is exactly what I mean." Daniel smiled faintly. "No, this is exactly what I need." He turned back to them. "You can take this message to my wife. There will be no mediation, no quiet settlement, no management of appearances." The lawyer stiffened. "Then this will become adversarial." Daniel nodded. "It already is." They left shortly after, their confidence visibly diminished. When the door closed, Annie sat back down, suddenly drained. "My stomach hurts," she murmured. Marcus brought her a juice box from the vending machine, his movements gentle. "Slow sips," he said. Daniel watched her drink, the irony not lost on him. He felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him, not paternal exactly, but resolute. Annie had stepped into a world that devoured people whole and had done so without armor. "Annie," he said, "if this becomes overwhelming, you can step back." She shook her head. "If I step back, they step forward." He nodded, accepting the truth of it. That evening, Sam returned with an update that shifted the board. "The nurse from that night," he said, "just asked for counsel." Daniel sat up slightly. "Meaning?" "Meaning she's scared," Sam replied. "And scared people talk." Annie looked up, eyes sharp. "She knows something." "Yes," Sam said. "And she's ready to tell it. I'm adding Mazet." Daniel closed his eyes briefly, a mix of relief and dread washing over him. "Then this stops being about what Annie saw," he said, "and starts being about what they did," Sam finished. Annie hugged her jacket to her chest. "I don't want anyone else to get hurt." Daniel looked at her, voice steady. "Neither do I." Outside the window, the city lights blinked on, indifferent and vast. Inside the room, a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. They had tried to silence a man by altering his mind. They had failed because a child refused to look away. The nurse broke before sunrise. Daniel learned this from Sam, who returned to the room with a different energy than before, less guarded, more intent. He closed the door behind him and spoke in a low voice, as if the walls themselves were listening. "She asked for protection," Sam said. "Not from the hospital, from the people behind this." Daniel sat up slightly. "She's willing to testify?" "Yes," Sam replied. "But she's terrified. And for good reason." Annie, curled on the chair with her knees drawn up, lifted her head. "Did they tell her what would happen if she talked?" Sam looked at her for a long moment. "Not in words." Annie nodded. "That's worse." Daniel felt a familiar, bitter recognition. Threats didn't always need language. Sometimes they lived in looks, in favors withdrawn, in careers quietly destroyed. "What does she know?" Daniel asked. Sam opened his folder. "Enough to change the direction of this case." 3090 he said. He explained slowly, carefully, as if laying down pieces of a fragile structure. The nurse had been instructed to follow a medication adjustment approved verbally, not logged properly. She had questioned it. She had been told it was temporary, harmless, necessary, until matters settled. She didn't know who ordered it, Sam continued. Only that it came through someone who didn't usually give clinical instructions. Daniel closed his eyes. "My wife." "Indirectly," Sam said, "through an intermediary." Annie hugged her jacket tighter. "That's how they don't get caught." "Yes," Sam said. "They keep their hands clean." Daniel opened his eyes, the weight of it pressing down on him. "And the nurse?" "She regrets not stopping it," Sam said. "She says when she saw you that morning asking questions, she realized how close it had come." Annie whispered, She was scared like me. Daniel nodded. Fear can wake people up. There was a knock at the door. This time, it was firm, official. 2 individuals entered, federal agents, credentials visible, posture unmistakable. Daniel recognized the shift immediately. This was no longer just a medical matter. Mr. Wright, one of them said, we'd like to ask you a few questions. Daniel glanced at Annie, then at Sam. She stays. The agent hesitated, then nodded. Understood. The questions were precise. Dates, times, names. Daniel answered them carefully, anchoring everything to documented facts. When they asked about Annie, Daniel let her speak for herself. I didn't want to talk, she said simply. But I didn't want him to forget. The agents exchanged a glance. Forget what? One asked. Who he is, Annie replied. The room fell silent. When the agents left, Daniel felt the exhaustion finally catch up to him. His hands trembled slightly, a reminder that while his mind was sharpening, his body was still recovering. Marcus noticed immediately. You need rest. Daniel nodded. Soon, Annie climbed onto the edge of the chair, closer to the bed. Are you scared now? She asked. Daniel considered the question. I'm angry, he said. And I'm determined. But no, I'm not scared like before. Why not? Because the truth isn't alone anymore, he said. Annie seemed to think about that, then smiled faintly. In the afternoon, news arrived that made the hospital feel suddenly very small. Sam lowered his voice. Your wife's accounts are being reviewed. Tutti prison. Daniel's breath caught. Already, financial oversight flagged the attempted conservatorship, Sam said. That triggered interest. Now they're seeing patterns. Annie tilted her head. Patterns like when someone always gets what they want? Yes, Sam replied. Exactly like that. Daniel stared at the ceiling, memories rearranging themselves. Conversations he had brushed aside. Decisions he had signed without question. Trust given too easily because it felt familiar. I should have seen it, he said quietly. Annie shook her head. No one sees traps when they think they're safe. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest, not pain, but grief. For the version of himself who believed safety was permanent. That evening, the nurse was moved under protective supervision. The intermediary resigned. The hospital issued a statement that said everything and nothing at once. And still, Daniel knew this was far from over. Annie sat by the window again, watching the city settle into night. Mr. Wright? She said. Yes. If they didn't plan for me, what else didn't they plan for? Daniel smiled. A real one this time. Conscience, he said. They never planned for conscience. She nodded slowly. That's good. It is, Daniel agreed. Because conscience spreads. Outside, lights flickered on across the skyline. Somewhere, people who believed themselves untouchable were realizing the ground beneath them wasn't as solid as they thought. Daniel reached for the call button, then stopped. He didn't need it. For the first time in days, he felt ahead of the moment rather than behind it, and it had all started with a child who refused to stay quiet. The hospital no longer felt neutral. By the 5th day, Daniel could sense the shift the moment he woke. The air in the room carried intention now. People entered knowing why they were there. People who shouldn't be there no longer were. Annie noticed it first. They stopped pretending, she said, watching through the narrow window as 2 men in suits spoke quietly with hospital administration down the hall. Daniel followed her gaze. Pretending what? That this is just about you being sick, she replied. He nodded. Yes, they have. Sam arrived mid-morning with news that confirmed it. The nurse's statement is being corroborated, he said, setting his phone down. Phone records, badge access. Someone escorted her into the medication storage area after hours. Daniel's jaw tightened. Authorized? Not officially, Sam replied. But the escort had clearance. Annie looked up. The kind that doesn't get written down. Sam gave her a measured look. Exactly. Marcus folded his arms. So now what? Now, Sam said. This becomes criminal. The word settled heavily. Daniel leaned back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling. For years, he had understood risk in terms of markets and leverage. This was different. This was about intent, about a line crossed not for profit, but for possession. They wanted to own the outcome, Daniel said quietly, even if it meant erasing me. End quote. Annie hugged her jacket tighter. People do that when they think someone belongs to them. Daniel felt a chill at the truth in her words. Late that afternoon, Daniel was moved not to a different wing, but into a more controlled routine. Two-factor verification for medication, restricted access list, a private nurse whose name and credentials Daniel verified personally. Annie watched every step. You don't trust easily anymore, she observed. Daniel smiled faintly. I trust deliberately. Ready, 10. That's better, she said. The social worker returned that evening, accompanied by a woman from Child Services. This time, the conversation centered on Annie. We want to make sure she's safe, the woman said gently. Annie stiffened immediately. Marcus spoke first. She is. The woman nodded. We just need to ask a few questions. Annie looked at Daniel. Am I going somewhere? Daniel's heart clenched. He had known this moment would come. No, he said firmly. You're not being taken away. The woman smiled reassuringly. That's not our intention. Annie studied her. You say that now. The woman paused, then nodded. You're right. Words matter. She turned to Daniel. Mr. Wright, your involvement has complicated things in a good way, but we need clarity about Annie's living situation. Marcus straightened. She lives with me. And before that, Marcus hesitated. Annie answered instead. We moved. A lot. The woman softened. That can be hard. Annie shrugged. You learn not to unpack. Daniel felt the weight of that sentence settle into him. When the meeting ended, Annie was quiet for a long time. Did I do something wrong? She asked. No, Daniel said immediately. You told the truth. She nodded. That always makes things bigger. Yes, he agreed. It does. That night, Daniel dreamed. He dreamed of rooms filled with paper, contracts stacked like walls, signatures looping endlessly without meaning. He dreamed of trying to speak while someone else answered for him, their voice wearing his name. He woke with his heart racing. Annie was awake too, sitting upright in her chair. You were breathing fast, she said. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Bad dream. She tilted her head. About forgetting? He hesitated, then nodded. She stood and walked closer to the bed, stopping just short of touching it. You didn't forget, she said. I wouldn't let you. As a mind, the certainty in her voice was startling. Daniel swallowed. Thank you. In the morning, Sam returned with an update that shifted the ground again. Your wife's intermediary flipped, he said. Full cooperation. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. What are they saying? That the medication switch wasn't the endgame, Sam replied. It was step one. Annie's fingers dug into her jacket. There was more. Yes, Sam said. Once your capacity was questioned, they planned to accelerate asset transfers. Daniel exhaled slowly. And Annie? Sam met his gaze. She wasn't part of the plan, which means she was a liability. Daniel finished. The word felt ugly in his mouth. Annie said quietly. That's why they were mad. Daniel nodded. That's why. The realization settled heavily. Annie hadn't just disrupted a scheme. She had made herself visible to people who preferred shadows. That afternoon, Daniel made a decision he had been circling for days. I want legal guardianship reviewed, he said to Sam. Temporary, if necessary. Annie looked up sharply. Of who? You, Daniel said. The room went very still. Marcus stood. Daniel, I'm not taking her from you, Daniel said quickly. I'm adding protection. Layers. Annie's voice was barely audible. Why? Daniel met her eyes. Because people who speak truth shouldn't have to do it alone. Avid. She searched his face for a long moment. You're serious, she said. Yes, Daniel replied. Completely. Annie sat back down slowly. That's big. Yes, Daniel said. It is. That evening, as the sun dipped below the city skyline, Annie sat by the window again. Mr. Wright? She asked. Yes? Do you think this would have happened if I wasn't there? Daniel didn't answer right away. No, he said finally. I think it would have happened quietly. She nodded. Quiet things are easier to hide. Yes, he said, and louder to regret. She rested her forehead against the glass. I didn't want to be loud. Daniel smiled softly. Sometimes courage is just refusing to stay quiet. Outside, the city lights flickered on, one by one, indifferent to the turning of private lives. Inside the room, something fragile but unbreakable was forming a bond forged not by choice or convenience, but by truth spoken at the right moment. Daniel understood now that whatever came next, courts, fallout, consequences, it would not erase what had already happened. Annie had been seen, and that could not be undone. The decision didn't spread quietly. Daniel felt it in the subtle tightening of the hospital's posture, in the way administrators suddenly became precise with their words, in how every interaction seemed to carry an invisible witness. By the next morning, the question of Annie's protection had moved beyond conversation and into process. Paperwork arrived, not rushed, not sloppy. Clean, methodical documents prepared by people who understood how power resisted change and how it eventually yielded. Sam laid them out on the table beside Daniel's bed, arranging them carefully, as if the order itself mattered. This doesn't remove Marcus, Sam said. It adds legal insulation. Marcus stood with his hands in his pockets, listening intently. Meaning no one can move her without a court order, Sam replied. No sudden safety concerns. No quiet relocations. A.T. Annie sat on the chair, her feet tucked beneath her again. She watched the papers without touching them. They can't take me, she asked. No, Daniel said. Not without a fight. And not without me knowing. She nodded slowly. That's new. Daniel smiled faintly. It is. The social worker returned later that morning, this time alone. She spoke with the careful warmth of someone who understood the stakes. This isn't about removing Annie from her life, she said, glancing briefly at Marcus. It's about stability. Annie tilted her head. Stability doesn't mean staying still. The social worker paused, then nodded. You're right. Daniel watched the exchange closely. Annie had a way of reframing conversations, pulling them away from rehearsed language and toward something more honest. Adults weren't used to that. Some resisted it, others leaned into it. The social worker leaned in. Annie, she said, do you feel safe right now? Annie looked around the room. At Marcus, at Daniel, at the door guarded discreetly by security. She thought for a moment. Yes, she said, but safe can change. The social worker smiled gently. That's very insightful. Annie shrugged. You learn it fast. That afternoon, the nurse's testimony became official. Daniel wasn't present when it was given, but he felt the ripple immediately. Sam returned with a grim expression and a nod that said more than words. She confirmed everything, Sam said. The instructions, the pressure, the expectation that no one would question it. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. And my wife? Sam hesitated. She hasn't responded yet. Annie looked up sharply. That means she's planning. Yes, Sam replied. It does. Marcus ran a hand over his face. How much worse does this get? Sam answered honestly. Before it gets better? Likely very. Was day. Daniel watched Annie carefully. She wasn't crying. She wasn't panicking. She was quiet, in the way people became when they were bracing themselves. You don't have to stay in the middle of this, Daniel said gently. Annie shook her head. I already am. There was no drama in her voice, just acceptance. Late afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. A man from Daniel's board arrived unannounced, his demeanor controlled but tense. He shook Daniel's hand, then glanced at Annie with visible uncertainty. This situation is concerning, the man said carefully. Investors are asking questions. Daniel nodded. They should. This could affect confidence, the man continued. The narrative is getting out of hand. Annie looked up. Truth isn't a narrative. The man blinked, then laughed nervously. She's perceptive. Daniel didn't smile. She's accurate. The board member cleared his throat. We're concerned about your judgment. Daniel met his gaze steadily. You should be concerned about my absence of judgment before now. The man shifted. Are you saying, I'm saying, Daniel interrupted, that if my capacity had been compromised, You would have continued business as usual. The silence answered for him. When the man left, Annie whispered, "He was scared too." Daniel nodded. Because systems rely on people not asking uncomfortable questions. Ein. Annie leaned back against the chair. People get mad when questions cost them money. Yes, Daniel said. They do. That evening, Daniel was cleared to walk short distances. A nurse assisted him slowly down the hallway. Annie and Marcus followed a few steps behind. The corridor looked different from this angle, longer, more exposed. Daniel felt the weight of being seen. Truly seen. Not as an image or a figurehead, but as a man who had nearly lost himself. As they turned a corner, Annie stopped suddenly. "Wait," she whispered. Daniel turned. "What is it?" She pointed subtly down the hall. Two people stood near a vending machine, speaking in low voices. One of them glanced their way and immediately looked away. "They're watching," Annie said. Daniel studied the scene. He recognized the look, not curiosity, but assessment. "Yes," he said. "They are." Annie took his hand without asking. The contact was brief, instinctive. Daniel didn't pull away. Back in the room, Sam was waiting. "Your wife contacted her attorneys," he said. "She's requesting a private meeting." Daniel sat down slowly. "When?" "Tonight." Annie's grip tightened on her jacket. "Is that safe?" Daniel considered the question carefully. "It will be controlled," he said, "and it will be recorded." Annie nodded. "People lie less when they know they're being heard." Daniel smiled faintly. "You're learning the world too fast, too." Annie looked at him seriously. The world didn't wait. As night fell, the city lights returned, indifferent and familiar. Inside the room, Daniel prepared for the next confrontation, aware that what remained unspoken between him and his wife was heavier than anything already said. Annie sat quietly by the window again. "Mr. Wright?" she asked. "Yes. Even if this ends, some people won't like me." Daniel met her eyes. "Some people already don't." She frowned. "That's scary." "Is Nauster?" "Yes," he said. "But it also means you mattered." She considered that. "I think I can live with that." Daniel leaned back, feeling the slow burn of resolve settle deeper into him. The truth was no longer fragile. It was moving. The meeting took place just after dusk. Daniel insisted it be held in his hospital room. Not a conference space, not a private office arranged by lawyers. He wanted the context intact, the IV stand, the monitors, the quiet reminder of how close this had come to erasing him. Sam oversaw the setup personally. 2 discrete recording devices were placed where no one could miss them. Security remained outside the door, visible but silent. Annie sat on the chair near the window, her legs tucked beneath her. Marcus stood beside her, one hand resting lightly on the back of the chair. Neither of them spoke. Their presence was not confrontational, it was anchoring. When Daniel's wife entered, she paused just long enough to take it all in. "You've turned this into a spectacle," she said. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He waited until she sat, until the door closed, until the room settled into stillness. "No," he said calmly. "I turned it into a record." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the recording devices. "Is that necessary?" "Yes," Daniel replied. "It is." She crossed her legs, folding her hands in her lap with practiced composure. "Then let's be clear. That's exactly what I want," Daniel said. Silence stretched between them. Years of shared history pressed in, heavy and complicated. Annie felt it, too. She shifted slightly, her gaze moving between them, alert but quiet. Daniel spoke first. "You authorized a medication change." His wife inhaled slowly. "I facilitated a temporary adjustment." "You attempted to impair my cognition," Daniel said. "I attempted to protect our future," she replied evenly. "Our," Daniel repeated. "Or yours." Her jaw tightened. "Don't pretend you didn't benefit from my foresight all these years." "I benefited from partnership," Daniel said. "This wasn't partnership." She leaned forward. "You were making reckless decisions." "Inwell." "Reckless to whom?" he asked. "To the structure we built," she said. "To the people who rely on it." Annie spoke quietly, her voice steady. "People rely on truth too." Daniel's wife turned toward her, irritation breaking through the polish. This is between adults. Daniel's voice sharpened. Everything that matters here involves her. His wife sat back, studying him as if reassessing a piece of furniture she had always assumed was fixed. You've changed. Yes, Daniel said. Because I almost lost myself. She exhaled. I was buying time. You were stealing agency. Daniel replied. Annie watched closely. She noticed something subtle then, the way the woman avoided certain words. The way she circled responsibility instead of naming it. You didn't ask him, Annie said softly. Daniel's wife laughed once, brittle. Ask permission to save him? To save yourself. Annie corrected. The woman's eyes flashed. You don't know anything about me. Annie nodded. That's true, but I know what you did. Silence dropped hard. Daniel felt the moment crystallize. This ends now, he said. No more intermediaries. No more quiet arrangements. She leaned back, her confidence eroding just enough to reveal calculation underneath. You're prepared for what this costs? Yes, Daniel said without hesitation. She looked at Annie again. Something like resentment surfacing. You're willing to burn everything because of her. Daniel answered calmly. I'm willing to rebuild everything because of her. That landed. For the first time, the woman looked uncertain. You won't win, she said quietly. Daniel met her gaze. I already did. She stood abruptly. You're choosing chaos. Daniel shook his head. I'm choosing clarity. As she turned toward the door, Annie spoke once more. You were counting on me being invisible, she said. The woman stopped, her hand on the door. Annie continued, her voice not accusing, just precise. That's why you didn't plan for me. The woman didn't turn around. You should have stayed quiet. Annie replied simply, people get hurt when you do. The door closed behind her. For a long moment, no one moved. Daniel felt his hands tremble not from fear, but from release. He exhaled slowly, deeply, as if setting down something he had carried too long. Sam broke the silence. That went exactly where it needed to. Daniel nodded. Yes. Annie slid off the chair, suddenly exhausted. Marcus steadied her. You okay? He asked softly. She nodded. Talking takes more energy than listening. Daniel smiled faintly. That's true. Later that night, the hospital quieted again. The recordings were secured. The paperwork moved forward. Lines that had once been blurred sharpened into something unmistakable. Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the meeting in his mind, not the words, but the shift. Something had ended. Something else had begun. Annie sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. Mr. Wright? She said. Yes? She's not done, Annie said. No, Daniel agreed. But neither are we. She nodded, satisfied. Outside, the city kept moving, unaware that a reckoning had just passed through one hospital room. Inside, Daniel felt steadier than he had in years, not because the danger was gone, but because it had been named, and named things could be faced. The consequences arrived quietly, which Daniel found far more unsettling than confrontation. By morning, the hospital corridor outside his room had thinned. Fewer administrators. Fewer whispered conversations that stopped when he looked up. Instead, there was an almost deliberate normalcy, as if the system were resetting itself now that the terms had changed. Annie noticed it too. They're acting like it's over, she said, watching a nurse adjust a chart without hesitation. Daniel shook his head. They're acting like it's contained. That's different, Annie replied. Yes, Daniel said. It is. Sam arrived just before noon with a stack of documents and a look that suggested the chessboard had expanded. Your wife filed an emergency motion last night, he said. Daniel felt a familiar tightening in his chest. For what? To challenge your capacity, Sam replied. Again, different angle. Annie's fingers curled into her jacket. She said she wouldn't. 8. Sam didn't soften it. People say many things when they realize they're losing. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. What's her argument? That you're being influenced, Sam said. That you're emotionally compromised by trauma. That a child witness has created undue pressure. Annie's jaw tightened. So I'm the problem. No, Daniel said immediately. You're the excuse. Sam nodded. The court will see it for what it is. But it means more scrutiny. Marcus shifted uneasily. On her, on everyone, Sam replied, especially Annie. Annie absorbed that without flinching. That means I have to be careful. Daniel looked at her. You already are. Annie shook her head. Careful in a different way. She didn't elaborate, but Daniel understood. There was a difference between speaking up and surviving the aftermath of having done so. That afternoon, a child psychologist arrived. Not mandated, but recommended. Daniel agreed after Annie was asked first. The woman spoke gently, asking about school, about favorite foods, about places Annie felt safe. Annie answered politely, selectively. When the psychologist asked about the hospital, Annie paused. I don't like rooms where adults whisper, she said. The psychologist nodded. Why? Because whispering means secrets, Annie replied. And secrets usually mean someone gets hurt. Daniel felt a sharp ache behind his eyes. When the session ended, the psychologist pulled Daniel aside. She's remarkably grounded, she said. But she's carrying responsibility that isn't hers. Daniel nodded. I know. She trusts you, the psychologist added. That matters. It did. Later, as the sun dipped low and shadows lengthened across the room, Daniel was cleared for discharge planning. Not to go home, not yet, but to transition into monitored recovery. Annie listened quietly as logistics were discussed. Transport, security, locations. Will I go with you? She asked suddenly. The question landed hard. Daniel looked at Marcus, then back at Annie. If you want to, he said carefully. And if your uncle agrees, Marcus didn't hesitate. If it keeps her safe, Annie nodded. I want to. Daniel felt something shift inside him, not ownership, not obligation, but alignment. Whatever came next, they would not be separated by convenience. That evening, Daniel's phone rang, a number he hadn't expected. I heard what happened, said a voice he recognized immediately, an old partner, one he had outgrown but never fully cut loose. You're stirring things up. Daniel smiled faintly. Truth does that. There was a pause. Be careful. Daniel glanced at Annie, who was watching him intently. I am, he said. Finally, when the call ended, Annie asked, was that a friend? Once, Daniel replied. Maybe again, or maybe not. She nodded. Some people only like you when you're quiet. He tapped to. Yes, Daniel said. They do. Night settled over the city again. Annie sat on the edge of the chair, tracing patterns on the armrest with her finger. Mr. Wright? She asked. Yes. If I hadn't been there, would you still be you? Daniel didn't answer immediately. He thought of the medication, the labels, the narrow margin between clarity and confusion. I don't know, he said honestly. And that's what scares me. Annie nodded. That's why I yelled. He smiled softly. I'm glad you did. She leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. Yelling is hard. So is listening, Daniel said. She opened one eye. You did both. Daniel felt a quiet certainty settle over him. The coming days would bring hearings, statements, pressure from every direction. His wife would not retreat easily. Systems rarely surrendered without resistance. But something fundamental had changed. The truth was no longer fragile. It had witnesses, records, a child who refused to be erased, and a man who refused to forget what he had almost lost. And that made all the difference. The transition happened at dawn. Daniel stood by the window, dressed for the first time in days in something other than a hospital gown. The clothes felt unfamiliar on his body, as if they belonged to a version of him that had existed before the fever, before the glass of water, before everything had fractured and reassembled. Annie watched him from the chair, her legs swinging slightly. You look different, she said. Daniel glanced down at himself. Better or worse? More awake, Annie replied. He smiled faintly. That's accurate. The private medical transport arrived quietly. No sirens, no spectacle. Just two professionals with calm voices and a checklist that had been reviewed too many times to fail now. Sam oversaw everything. His attention sharp, his movements efficient. This is temporary, Sam said to Daniel as they walked down the corridor. A controlled environment. Security is layered. Daniel nodded. And the hearing? 2 days, Sam replied. Your wife's motion will be addressed head-on. Annie listened, absorbing details without comment. The hospital doors slid open, letting in cool morning air. Daniel paused for a moment at the threshold, the city stretching out before him. He felt lighter, but not free. Freedom came later after truth finished doing its work. Annie stepped beside him. You okay? She asked. Yes, he said. Because you're here. End quote. She nodded, accepting that without ceremony. The temporary residence was discreet, quiet, set back from the street behind a tall hedge and an unremarkable gate. Inside, it felt neither luxurious nor sterile. It felt intentional. Annie explored cautiously, touching surfaces, peeking into corners. It smells like lemons, she observed. Daniel smiled. Cleaners. That's good, she said. It means people care. He hadn't thought of it that way before. Marcus settled in quickly, familiar with the rhythm of places that were not meant to feel permanent. He kept close to Annie without hovering, his presence steady. The first day passed slowly. Daniel met with attorneys, physicians, and advisors in careful succession. Each conversation circled the same themes: capacity, consent, credibility. Each time Annie was mentioned, Daniel felt the weight of responsibility press in. She's a witness, one attorney said carefully, and a minor. Oh, wait. She's a person, Daniel replied. Who acted when no one else did? The attorney nodded. That matters. In the afternoon, Annie sat with Daniel in the small garden behind the house. The sun filtered through the trees, dappling the ground with shifting light. She picked at a loose thread on her jacket. Quiet. People are going to talk about me, she said. Yes, Daniel replied. Some will be mean. Yes, he said again. She looked up. Will you still say I did the right thing? Daniel didn't hesitate. Every time. She seemed to relax slightly, as if that answer anchored something. That night, Daniel slept more deeply than he had in weeks. He dreamed of walking through a house where every door was labeled clearly. No tricks. No hidden rooms. When he woke, he felt steadier. The next day brought preparation. Sam laid out timelines and strategies. They'll argue emotional influence, he said. They'll try to frame this as overreaction. Daniel nodded. Then we respond with facts. And with Annie's testimony? Sam asked. Daniel glanced toward the window, where Annie sat reading quietly. Only if she wants to. Sam inclined his head. Good. Annie looked up. I can talk. Daniel crossed the room and sat beside her. You don't have to, he said. She considered this. I want to, she said finally, but I want someone to help me say it. I have to hisn an intuibility. We'll make sure of that, Daniel replied. The hearing day arrived with a gray sky and a low, steady tension. The room was smaller than Daniel expected. Not a grand courtroom. A controlled setting where words carried weight precisely because there was no room to hide behind theatrics. Daniel sat at the table, posture straight, eyes clear. Annie sat behind him with Marcus, her feet barely touching the floor. When Daniel's wife entered, she did not look at Annie. She did not look at Daniel either, at first. She took her seat, composed, surrounded by counsel. Proceedings began. Experts spoke. Doctors testified. Documents were presented. The attempt to shift blame toward misunderstanding and emotional volatility was laid out carefully, professionally. Then it was Annie's turn. The room shifted as she was brought forward, accompanied by a child advocate. She climbed onto the chair, small against the setting, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She took a breath. I didn't want to be here, she said. I wanted to go home. The judge leaned forward slightly. But I saw something, Annie continued. And if I didn't say it, someone would get hurt. She spoke slowly, clearly. She did not exaggerate. She did not accuse. She described the labels, the whispering, the feeling that something was wrong. When adults tell kids to be quiet, she said, it's usually because the adults don't want to hear something. There was a pause, the kind that carried weight. When it ended, Annie climbed down from the chair and returned to her seat, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He did not look at his wife. The decision came later that day. The motion challenging Daniel's capacity was denied. Safeguards were ordered, oversight established, boundaries drawn clearly and publicly. When they stepped outside, Annie exhaled deeply. "That was loud," she said. Daniel smiled. "Yes, but necessary." Ulting, she looked up at him. "Did we win?" Daniel considered the question. "We protected the truth," he said. "That's better." As they walked away, Daniel felt the shape of the future begin to settle, not smooth, not easy, but honest. And honesty, he knew now, was the only foundation worth standing on. The ruling didn't end the tension. It transformed it. Daniel felt the shift immediately in the days that followed, not relief, not closure, but a recalibration. People no longer questioned whether he was capable. They watched instead, measuring how he would use the clarity he had fought to keep. The temporary residence settled into a quiet rhythm. Mornings were structured, medication administered under supervision, meetings scheduled with precision. Annie adapted faster than anyone expected. She learned where the sun landed in the garden at different hours, which floorboard creaked near the hallway, which voices outside the gate belonged to guards, and which belonged to neighbors walking dogs. "You always know who's coming," Daniel observed one afternoon as she looked up before a knock sounded. "They walk different," Annie replied. "People who belong don't rush." Daniel smiled. He was learning from her as much as she was learning from him. The legal process moved forward methodically. Statements were entered, records cross-checked. The nurse's testimony was reinforced by data access logs, camera footage, timing inconsistencies that no explanation could smooth over. What had once been dismissed as a misunderstanding now stood exposed as orchestration. Sam summarized it one evening, spreading documents across the table. "This isn't about one decision anymore," he said. "It's about a pattern." Daniel nodded. "Patterns tell the truth when people don't." Annie sat nearby, listening. "That means other people got hurt," she said quietly. "Yes," Daniel replied. "Or almost did." She frowned. "That's worse." Daniel didn't disagree. The press began circling, not aggressively yet, but persistently. Requests for statements, invitations to clarify. Daniel declined most of them, choosing silence not as retreat, but as strategy. "Silence can be honest," Annie said when he explained it to her. "If it's not hiding." "Yes," Daniel agreed. "That's the difference." One afternoon, Daniel received confirmation he hadn't expected so soon. The investigation would proceed beyond internal review. External authorities would take over. The implications were significant not just for his wife, but for the network that had enabled her actions. When he shared the news, Annie went very still. "Does that mean she's in trouble?" she asked. Daniel considered his answer carefully. "It means she'll have to answer for what she did." Annie nodded. "That's fair." He studied her face. There was no satisfaction there. No desire for revenge. Just an acceptance that actions had consequences. That evening, Daniel sat alone in the garden as dusk settled. The air was cool. The sky streaked with the last light of day. He thought about how close he had come to losing not just control, but himself. How easily his voice could have been replaced by someone else's certainty. Annie joined him, sitting on the low stone wall. "You're thinking hard," she said. "Yes," Daniel replied. "About her?" "About everything," he said. "About how much trust costs." She swung her legs slightly. "Trust isn't bad," she said. "Just expensive." He laughed softly. "That might be the wisest thing anyone said to me in years." The next day brought an unexpected visitor. A woman arrived unannounced, introduced by security only after careful verification. She was older, plainly dressed. Her posture composed but not defensive. Daniel recognized her from old photographs. Someone his wife had rarely mentioned. "I won't stay long," the woman said. "I just needed to see you." Daniel gestured to the chair. "Please." She glanced at Annie, then back at Daniel. "You have good instincts," she said. "Both of you." Annie tilted her head. "Do I know you?" The woman smiled faintly. "No, but I know what it's like to be ignored." It said. She spoke quietly, without accusation, explaining how she had once been pushed aside, how warnings had gone unheard because they were inconvenient. how she had watched power protect itself. "I didn't come to defend anyone," she said to Daniel. "I came to tell you this didn't start with you." Daniel absorbed that. It rarely does. When she left, Annie asked, "Why did she come now?" Daniel thought for a moment. "Because sometimes people find courage when they see someone else use theirs." "Is one a very Phelan?" Annie nodded. "Courage is contagious." "Yes," Daniel said. "It is." As the week ended, plans were finalized for the next phase. Daniel would step back into public life carefully, deliberately. Annie's schooling would resume in a controlled way. Marcus would remain close, his role formalized and protected. On the last evening before the transition, Daniel and Annie sat together in the quiet living room. No papers, no phones, just the low hum of the house and the sound of the city beyond the walls. "Are you tired?" Daniel asked. Annie nodded. "A little. You did more than anyone should have to," he said. She looked up at him. "I just didn't want something bad to happen." Daniel felt a swell of emotion rise, steady and deep. That's how most good things start. She considered this. "Will it stop now?" "No," Daniel said honestly. "But it will be harder to hide." She smiled faintly. "That's good. IF." He reached out, resting his hand lightly over hers on the armrest. She didn't pull away. Whatever came next, trials, judgments, reputations reshaped, it would unfold in daylight. And daylight, Daniel knew now, was the one thing no careful plan could control once it arrived. The story did not end with a verdict or a headline. It ended quietly, the way most real reckonings do, without applause, without finality, but with something far more lasting. Daniel returned to his life in stages, not the old life. That one no longer fit. He returned instead to a recalibrated version of it, one shaped by boundaries rather than assumptions. Meetings were shorter. Decisions were slower. Authority was shared where it had once been hoarded. People noticed. Some respected it. Others resented it. Daniel no longer confused the two. Annie returned to school on a crisp Monday morning, wearing a jacket that fit properly for the first time in years. Marcus walked her to the gate and stopped, letting her take the final steps alone. She didn't look back. Daniel watched from the car, his chest tight with a feeling he hadn't expected, pride mixed with grief. Childhood should never require courage, and yet, here it was, standing straight and small, carrying more truth than most adults ever dared. That afternoon, Daniel received the final update. Charges would proceed, not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily, methodically, with a paper trail too clear to dismiss. His wife's name would not vanish overnight, but it would never sound the same again. Accountability, Daniel had learned, rarely arrived as punishment. It arrived as exposure. Annie didn't ask about it. She seemed to understand instinctively that some endings didn't belong to her. What belonged to her was forward motion. Weeks passed. The city adjusted. The hospital returned to routine. The noise faded, but the changes held. Daniel established a permanent oversight council, independent, empowered, uncomfortable by design. He listened more than he spoke. When asked why, he answered simply, "Because silence almost cost me everything." People laughed sometimes. He let them. At home, evenings became something new. Annie did homework at the kitchen table. Marcus cooked. Daniel learned how to sit without planning, how to be present without preparing an exit. One night, Annie asked, "Do you still think about the water?" Daniel paused, then nodded. Yes, she considered this. "I think about the sound it made." "The glass breaking?" he asked. She nodded. It was loud, but after that, everything got quiet. Daniel smiled faintly. "That's how truth works sometimes." She looked at him seriously. "If I hadn't yelled, would you have forgiven her?" The question landed gently but firmly. Daniel answered honestly, "I don't know. I think I would have tried to understand. I think I would have doubted myself." Annie nodded. "That's why yelling matters." "Yes," Daniel said. "It does." Spring arrived without ceremony. Trees bloomed, schedules filled. Life continued in the ordinary ways that once felt guaranteed and now felt earned. On a Sunday afternoon, Daniel and Annie walked through the neighborhood park. Families passed them laughing, arguing, living. No one recognized them. No one pointed. Annie watched a group of younger children playing near the swings. "They don't know," she said. Daniel followed her gaze. "Know what?" "That they're safe," she replied. He smiled. "That's how it should be." She thought about that. "I hope it stays that way." "So do I," Daniel said. They sat on a bench, the sun warm on their faces. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt something settle fully into place, not resolution, not relief, but acceptance. The past had been faced, the present was being lived, and the future, while uncertain, was no longer hidden behind someone else's control. Annie leaned back against the bench, her eyes half closed. "Mister, right?" "Yes. Do you think I'm brave?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He chose his words carefully. "I think you're honest," he said. "And honesty takes courage when the world would rather you stay quiet." She smiled, satisfied. As they stood to leave, Annie took his hand, not tightly, not urgently, but comfortably, as if it had always belonged there. Daniel looked down at her. At the child who had refused invisibility, who had spoken when it was easier not to, who had changed the course of events simply by paying attention. The warning had been small, the consequences had not, and in a world that often rewarded silence, one voice, clear, young, and unafraid, had made all the difference. The story reminds us that truth often comes from the quietest voices, and courage is not defined by age, power, or status. It teaches that injustice survives when people look away, but it collapses the moment someone chooses to speak, even at great personal risk. Real justice is not loud or dramatic. It is patient, moral, and often carried by those society underestimates. Above all, the story shows that protecting the vulnerable is the highest form of integrity, and that a single honest act can awaken conscience, restore dignity, and change the course of many lives. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.